All right, we'll say good morning. Let us get started. Emir Hashem. Do a little Rambam today also, hopefully. Okay, so let's begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the shiur and drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach and Zechariah ben Zechariah, as well as to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for this morning, Mr. and Mrs. Martyr, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Mr. Martyr's father, Rafael ben Eliezer HaKohen. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. So we have an interesting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Tzadik Daled 94, and we are picking up on Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis 93b, Gufa, which is 7 lines up, 7 lines up from the bottom. So also, remember again, we began this sugya yesterday, and we'll delve into it now a bit more fully now. Gufa. Amr Ula. So also remember again, we are talking in the sugya of Derech Rechoka. We know the Torah tells us that if a person is B'derech Choka, a person is quote unquote too far away, then halacha lemaisa, they are exempt from Pesach Rishon and obligated in Pesach Sheni. So it says the Gemara Gufa, Amar Ula, Ezo hu derech rechoka. What's derech rechoka? What's the definition? So also remember again, in yesterday's daf, we went ahead and also, by the way, I want to thank a number of you. I think Sammy was the first one to text me the Google Maps from Yerushalayim to Modi'in. What I just want to point out, even though geographically it seems further than what the Gemara is describing, remember also that historical Yerushalayim was bigger than contemporary Yerushalayim. So it's possible again that depending on which border of Yerushalayim you are measuring from. It's also possible that historical Modi'in is also possible than, larger than bigger Modi'in. But again, also remember, I just want to point out all of the shiurim, all of the measurements that I was giving you yesterday, I was rounding. So remember again, there's a range in all of these shiurim. Okay, good. So remember, we saw Derech Rechoka. So Ula says, what's Derech Rechoka? Kol she'inu yachal likanis b'shas shchita. So Ula said, Derech Rechoka means you can't get to Yerushalayim b'shas shchita. So remember again, which means shas shchita, let's call it again, I'm just using approximations right now because it's not actually midday to sunset. So if you're too far away that you can't reach Yerushalayim between midday and sunset, that's called Derech Rechoka. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Kol she'en yecholin likanis b'shas achila. So we'll say, remember again, comes on Rabbi Yehuda with a dramatically different definition. Rabbi Yehuda holds that no, Derech Rechoka means you can't get to Yerushalayim during shas achila. So we'll say again, we will discuss this in greater depth. There's a machlokes as to what the window of consumption is for Karban Pesach. Is it chatzos? Is it until alos hashachar? Until the next morning. Okay, but leaving that aside, it's not important for now. The point is, Rabbi Yehuda obviously has a much larger window, right? That halacha l'maisa, as long as you can get to Yerushalayim by zman achila, you're good to go. To which the Gemara says, Amali Rava, Amali Rabba le'ula. So Rabba said to Ula, Lididach kasha Rabbi Yehuda kasha. The truth is, I have a question both on you and Rabbi Yehuda. Lididach kasha, according to you, Ula, who says that Derech Rechoka means that you can't get to Yerushalayim during Zman Shchita, the Amrit Kol She'en Yachal Likanis B'Shas Shchita, I v'ha Tamei Sheretz, then Yachal Likanis B'Shas Shchita. But I will say, what about the case of Tumas Sheretz? Remember again, what's the case of Tumas Sheretz? Ruvain becomes Tamei Tumas Sheretz. He touches a dead Sheretz on Erev Yom Tiv. So what's his status? Remember, Tumas Sheretz is a very lenient, is a very kal form of Tumah. So what has to happen? You go to the mikvah by day, and that night you're good to go. So if a person is tamei tumas sheretz, interestingly enough, what Rabba wants to suggest is it's ki'ilu they're b'derech rechoka, right? It's ki'ilu they're not in Yerushalayim during the zman shchita, but yet they will be fit during zman achila. So the Gemara says v'hatamei sheretz de'en yachol likanis b'shas shchita. So he's equating someone who's tamei tumas sheretz with someone who can't make it to Yerushalayim bizman shchita, because effectively they're in the same boat. Neither individual could be in the precincts of the Beis Hamikdash during the zman of shchita, and yet the ka'amrit shoktin v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. Yet halacha l'maisa, we know, also we've established that if somebody is tamei tumas sheretz, you can shecht and do zrika on their behalf. In other words, you can include them as part of the chabura. Why? Because that night they will be able to consume the carbon. So if that's the case, why don't you say the same thing about someone who can't make it here to Yerushalayim during Zman Shchita, but can be here during Zman Achila? Furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda Kasha. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the question is the Amar Kol Shein Yachal Ikanis B'Shas Achila. Rabbi Yehuda says Derech Rechoka means someone who can't make it to Yerushalayim during the time of consumption. I v'hot tamei sheretz the Yachal Ikanis B'Shas Achila. So we'll say so again. Question Rabbi Yehuda will also be from Tumas Sheretz. So someone who's tamei Tumas Sheretz, such a person is considered to be able to enter Yerushalayim during Zman Achila. V'ka Amar, and yet we said. Ein shochtin v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. Here, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we don't do zrika and shchita or shchita and zrika on behalf of a person who's tamei tumas sheretz. So what's going on over here? Amrle. So Ula responded, Lo l'didi kasha, v'lo l'Rav Yehuda kasha. The truth is, Rabbi, your question is not a question on me or Rav Yehuda. How so? L'didi lo kasha. So Ula says, your question is not a question to me. Why? Derech rechok l'tahar. So we'll say this is very interesting. So the first thing that Ula says is the concept of derech rechoka is dafka a din in tahorin, not a din in tamein. In other words, I will say we do not equate tamei with derech rechoka, even though of course they're mentioned in the same pasuk. Halacha l'maisa again. They're two different dinim. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. L'didi lo kasha. The afagav the derech rechoka patrona lahai the chazi la'arta or mechavile gabe tamei sheret. So I'll say even though again by derech rechoka we said remember by derech rechoka even though again if I can't be there b'shas shchita zula even though I could be there b'shas achila that's called derech rechoka. Yet interestingly enough the same mitzias by someone who's tamei allows him to participate, right? So remember again, this was the kasha that Rabbi raised against Ula. It sounds to me a case of where Ruvain is too far from Yerushalayim that he can't make it during Shchita, but he can get there during Achila. Seems to be the same exact mitzias as a person who's tamei tumas sheretz, because a person who's tamei tumas sheretz can't quote unquote be in Yerushalayim, can't be in the Beis Hamikdash b'shas Shchita, but is fit Bizman Achila, and yet he could be included as part of the Chabura, but the guy who's B'derech Rechoka can't be included as part of the Chabura. But Miltis, it's the same case. Both of these guys can't be present Bizman Shchita, but can be present Bizman Achila. Yet for Tumah, he could be part of the Chabura. Derech Rechoka, he can't be part of the Chabura. To which Ula essentially answers, they're two different halachas. They're two different halachas. I know it sounds the same to you, but lamaisa, they're just two different halachic constructs. So finish Rashi. Rashi says again, even though derech rechoka exempts the one who can make it by nighttime, but can't make it by daytime, Pitura ditar v'hainu derech rechoka shein yachal ikanis b'shas shchita the gabe asiya ksiv v'afa gav the yachal ikanis b'shas achil rachmana patre aval l'tamei lo tali rachmana pitura didei b'derech rechoka ella b'tuma. So we'll say essentially what Ula answers is it's just two different halachas. And because it's two different halachas, they operate with two different frameworks. With derech rechoka, it's a din in proximity. It's a din in proximity. Can you make it here? Can't you make it here? If you can make it here, fantastic. If you can't make it here, that's it, you're out. Tethered to the offering of the Karban Pesach. Tumah is tethered to the consumption of the Karban Pesach. So derech rechoka conceptually is defined. Can you make it for the Karban? Can't you make it for the Karban? Tumah is defined. Can you consume the Karban? Can't you consume the Karban? So we'll say fine. So we don't have to go through the rest of it. But this is actually very interesting because even though this whole time we're lumping together derech rechoka and tumah, what Ula's coming along and saying is conceptually they're two different things. Tumah is tethered to the concept of achila. If your tumah precludes you from achila, then ultimately Pesach Sheni. But if your tumah does not preclude you from achila, even if your tumah precludes you from asiyah, from the offering of the Karban, you could still participate in a chabura. Versus derech rechoka, which is tethered to the concept of asiya. If you can make it to Yerushalayim at the time of asiya, the shchita zrika, you're in. If you can't, Pesach Sheni. Furthermore, again, the top of Tzadik Dalam Alpha Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not a kasha either. Why? So the Gemara says Tamei Sheretz. Sorry, Lukasha Tamei Sheretz Rachmana Dachye. Because we'll say according to Rabbi Yehuda, a person. Remember, this is another machlokas about the status of a person who's Tamei Tumah Sheretz. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if you contracted Tumah Sheretz on erev Pesach, even though you went to the mikvah and all you need is hair of shemesh, halacha l'maisa, you cannot partake of Karban Pesach that night, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why not? Because the Torah actively excludes someone who's Tamei Tumah Sheretz. Where do you see that? Dichsiv, ish ki yeh Tamei lanefesh. So also listen to this. Because the Torah says if a person will be Tamei lanefesh. Now remember again, Tamei lanefesh means a person came in contact with the corpse. So we'll say, so now remember again, corpse tumah is a 7-day tumah. When the Torah says that a person who is Tamei Tumas Meis can't participate in Karban Pesach, what's the case? So we'll say the only case that makes sense that the Torah is actually commenting on is Milo Askinan Shechal Shvi'i Shalo Lios Berev Pesach. It only makes sense to say that the case the Gemara is dealing with is a case of where Erev Pesach was the 7th day of the person's Tara process. Why I will say? Because think about this. Any other circumstance, of course a person is parted from Karban Pesach. In other words, if I'm Tamei Tumas Meis and Erev Pesach falls out on my 4th day of my purification process, no one's going to suggest that halacha l'maisa I can participate in Karban Pesach because I'm in the middle of my Tumah process or my Tara process. I can't eat any type of karbanos. So the case of a person who's Tamei Tumas Meis being excluded from Karban Pesach, it appears to be that the most logical thing to say, it's a person whose 7th day of his Tara process occurs on Erev Pesach. Which means that what's going to happen by that evening, he's good to go, right? He's tar. And yet the Torah still says, no, he can't participate in Karban Pesach. So the Gemara says, now, interestingly enough, this is fascinating. We saw this before. A guy, 7th day of his Tara process of Tumas Meis is the equivalent to who? A person who's Tamei Tumas Sheretz. They're halachically in the same boat, in that both of them require immersion in a mikvah that day and essentially become pure that night. So Rabbi Yehuda suggests that if halacha l'maisa, a person who is Tamei Tumas Meis, 7th day of his purification process, which is Erev Pesach, can't eat the Karban Pesach that night, then a person who's Tamei Tumas Sheretz Erev Pesach can't eat Karban Pesach that night as well. Good. Both say the thing to take away from this, ultimately, again, is Ula's point, which we're going to come back to in just a bit, which is this fascinating idea that even though you could construct a case of Tumah, which seems to resemble exactly a case of Derech Rechoka, they're two different halachic constructs. And the concept of Tumah is really tethered to Achila. So whether or not your Tumah will preclude you from participation in a Chabur for Karban Pesach depends on whether or not by the time consumption comes around, are you fit for consumption or not. If you're going to be fit for consumption that night, then halacha l'maisa you could be part of the Chabura by day, even though you're still Tamei. Masha'ekin Derech Rechoka Ula suggests is tethered to the concept of Asiya, of Shchita. If you're too far away from Yerushalayim to make it there during Shas Shchita, even though you can make it by Shas Achila, you are precluded. That's Derech Rechoka Pesach Sheni. Tan Rabbana. Both say we're gonna build on this. This is fascinating. Hayu Omid Chutz L'Modiin. Both listen to this case. Somebody asked me this after shiur yesterday. Hayu Omid Chutz L'Modiin. So we'll say, let's say I'm further, right? I'm further away. I'm more than 15 mil. So I'm outside of Modiin. I'm in Tel Aviv. And what happens? V'yachal likanis besusim upradim. He'll say, but I can make it, right? If I get on my horse and I ride like the wind, I could make it to Yerushalayim. So what's my status? So the Gemara says, Yachal yei chayiv. You might have thought such a person would be chayiv. In other words, we'll say, I might have thought that Derech Rechoka is a p'tur, but that Einach Inami, if there is a way, right, I can get on the light rail, right? There is a way for me to go ahead and get to Yerushalayim. I might have thought that I should be chayiv, even though geographically I am b'derech rechoka. Talmud lomar ubederech lo haya. The pasuk says He was not on his way. Now I will say the pasuk that the Gemara is quoting over here is if a person, the Torah says, "Va'ish asher hu tahar ubederech lo haya." If a person was tahar and he was not baderech. Now I will say, so therefore the Torah goes on to say, and he didn't do Karban Pesach, he's chayiv kares. This is talking about a person who was not tamei, not baderech rechoka, still failed to do the Karban Pesach. Such a person is chayiv kares. So it's interesting. So when do I have liability for non-performance of Pesach Rishon? Ubederech lo haya, when I was not bederech rechoka. But however, v'hala haya baderech. But this individual was baderech. When it says baderech, means baderech rechoka. He was baderech rechoka. So I'll say, which is very interesting, which tells you that even if halacha lemaisa, I can technically make it. If I am halachically b'derech rechok, in other words, I'm outside of the 15 mil, I am exempt from Pesach Rishon and could be part, and I'm part of Pesach Nabosa. Now, can I try to make it to Yerushalayim? Of course I can. Remember, again, assuming that I could be part of a chabura, but you don't really want to risk that, right? You don't. It's necessarily. But again, technically speaking, I want to be clear. If halacha lemaisa, I am 30 mil out of Yerushalayim, but I happen to have a very fast horse and I can make it there, I have every right to do that. The Gemara is talking about, again, you might have thought that if you have a fast horse and you could make it there, that you would be chayiv, to which the Gemara says no. Once you're halachically within the construct of derech rechoka, which means that you are outside of a certain geographic proximity of Yerushalayim, you are exempt from Pesach Rishon, pushed off to Pesach Sheni. Listen to this next case, I will say. Haya omed lifnim min amodiim. The ein yachal likanis mipnei gimalim ukranos hama'akvos also. We'll say this is a great case. Right? Let's say I am inside the geographic area. I'm inside of Modiim. So I'm within 15 mil. So I'm in the area, therefore that would make me obligated in Pesach Rishon. But I can't get there. Why can't I get there? We'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. This is great. Rashi says, mipnei gimalim ukranos. So I'll say, why am I delayed? Why am I delayed? Like every other time you pack your family up to go somewhere, right? Every other time. So what happens? Mamish, this one forgot this. This one has to use the bathroom. Now there's traffic. So I'll say, so now watch this. So here I'm within the geographic proximity, but yet I'm delayed. I'm delayed maybe because of my family. I'm delayed. Literally means the camels and the wagons who are preventing me from getting there. Yachol lo yehe chayiv. You might have thought that maybe you're not chayiv. Talmud lomar ubederech lo haya. The only time you're not chayiv, or the only time the Torah says ubederech lo, he was not bederech rechoka. V'hari lo haya baderech, and this guy was not bederech rechoka. So we'll say, I think Yaakov was asking me about this yesterday. We'll say, so what this sounds like, this Gemara says, is that halacha lemaisa, if a person is not bederech rechoka, a person is geographically close, but let's say again you go ahead and you get delayed, and you therefore fail to do Karban Pesach Rishon, you're chayiv. You're chayiv for that. So I will say, which is interesting because I saw there's a little discussion about this, that literally what the Gemara says is if that's the case, the family's slowing you down, leave them, right? And not like leave them. Like, prepare, go do your Pesach, go do your thing, and get back to the mishpacha. So I will say this is actually pretty dramatic because what this tells you is that literally if there's a case of where you are not b'derech rechoka, let's say you get stuck in traffic, Erev Pesach, and you do not make it to Yerushalayim in time. So the Gemara indicates you are chayiv for that, which I will say teaches you something incredibly amazing. Personal responsibility. When you know that something has to get done, there's no such thing as something came up which precluded me from doing it. If it has to get done and it's important enough to get done, a person must take the individual, personalistic achrayus to get it done right. So many times there are things we want to accomplish, but we don't plan ahead. And when you don't plan ahead, then at the end of the day, things always come up and things derail your initiatives. What the Gemara is saying is, getting stuck in traffic and not getting to Yerushalayim in time, that's your fault. That's your fault. That's individual achrayus for that. Not making it in time for Yom Tiv, that's your fault. You could have left earlier. You could have made it a point to be on time. You could have gone the night before. You could have done a variety of different things. It's easy to blame extenuating circumstances when you don't plan ahead. Such an incredible yisod, because so many times in life we miss out on incredible and dramatic opportunities because we don't sufficiently plan ahead and we get caught in the proverbial life traffic. The Gemara says, you get caught in traffic, you miss out on opportunities, you're chayiv for that. Something is important enough, plan ahead to ensure that the job gets done. An incredible yisod. Amar Rava. We're going to spend a little bit of time speaking about some astronomy now, which we're going to go through relatively quickly. Well, when I say relatively quickly, very quickly. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Shisa Alpha Parsi Havi Alma. The world, well, it's actually very interesting. So Rava says over here, the world is literally the movement of the sun is 6,000 parsos. So we'll say, if you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Shisa Alpha Parsi, Rashi says, Hava Hekif Hiluch Hacham B'soch Hachalom Mizrach L'Marav. The movement of the sun from east to west spans 6,000 parsos. So we'll say, so just to understand, one parsa is approximately 3 miles, right? So Rava suggested that the span of the sun from east to west is 6,000 parsos. V'sumcha d'rakia, and ultimately the thickness. Now again, understand, much like science, right? So Chazal's astronomy, interestingly enough, although they're going to glean certain things from Pesukim, was based on the science of the time. I mentioned this before. We're going to see, I think it's the 5th parak in Gittin, where the Gemara has all of these like incredible remedies, right? Do you remember this Gemara from last cycle, right? Everybody knows the famous cure for migraines. Remember this one? You cut open the rooster, you cut open the chicken, you put it on your head. By the way, it does work, because if a chicken is bleeding out on your head, I think you forget about everything else, including your migraines. But again, I want to point out, this knowledge is what the Welt knew around them. This is what the world knew. So again, it's just echoing that which was known. So Rabbi says, literally again, the movement of the sun east to west spans an area of 6,000 parsos. So Sumcha d'rakia, the thickness of the sky, Alpha parsi is 1,000 parsos. Chad Gemara v'chad svara. So one is a tradition that we have, and one is a svara. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so now we're going to spend a lot of time contradicting or questioning this position of Rava, that the movement of the sun spans 6,000 parsos. So the Gemara says, so he holds like what Rabbi Achran said, how much does a regular person walk each day? Yud parsos, also we saw this yesterday. Stam, a regular person walks 10 parsos. Me'alos hashachar v'ad ha'netzachama heimilin. From Alos HaShachar until Netzachama, a person walks 5 mil. So we saw this in yesterday's daf. Mishkias Achama Tzeis HaKochavim Chamisha Milin. From sunset until Tzeis another 5 mil. Nimtza Ovyav Shel Rakia Echad Mishishim B'Yom. Therefore, ultimately, again, it turns out that the thickness of the Rakia is Echad Mishisha. Ultimately, again, 1/6 of the movement of the sun each day. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, now we'll say, now we're going to question this idea by Rava, that the movement of the sun is 6,000 parsos. So Meisvei Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ov Yov Sharakia Echad Me'asara Bayom, the thickness of the Rakia, ultimately again is 1/10, Echad Me'asara, 1/10 of the movement of the sun each day. Or when I say the movement of the sun, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but the trajectory of the sun from east to west. Teida, Kama mahalich adam beironi bayom. How far does a regular person walk in a day? 10 parsos, 10 parsos, umealos adanei tzachama arba'as milin. From alos hashachar until netzachama, a person walks 4 mil. This is a different calculation than before. Mishkias achama tzeitzacham arba'as milin. From shkia until tzeis 4 mil. Nimtza ovyav sharakia echad me'asara bayom. It turns out that halacha l'maisa, unlike what we said before, the thickness of the rakia is only 1/10 of the sun's movement by day. Tiyufta de Rava tiyufta. This refutes Rava's position. Do Ula tiyufta. Does it also refute the position of Ula as we mentioned before? No. Lema tevet tiyufta. I'm sorry. Do Ula tiyufta. It's also read that differently. It's also a refutation of Ula. Lema tevet tiyufta Rabbi Yochanan. Should it also refute the position of Rabbi Yochanan? Amr lacha ana biyamama hu da amri. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm referring to the daytime. V'rabanan hu de kato. The Kahashvan the Kadma. The Kahashvan the Kadma v'chashucha. The Rabbanon, when ultimately again measuring the amount of distance that a person travels by day, are including if a person starts out earlier than daybreak and goes later than 6. Ultimately, again, Sage should refute to position Rabbi Chanina as well. Lo vaya'itu shiny. Remember again, Rabbi Chanina's position was gleaned by the story of Lot, as we saw in yesterday's daf, that the Malachim went ahead and urged Lot to begin to travel early in the day, and he made it to Tzoar, a distance of 5 mil. So the Gemara says that was different. They covered more ground because the Malachim urged them. So they traveled faster than a regular person travels. Good. Tashma. Mitzrayim haya arba'a meos parsal bar meos parsal. We'll say Egypt is 400 parsos by 400 parsos. O Mitzrayim echad mishishim b'kush. And Mitzrayim, the size of Egypt, is 1/6 of Kush. The Kush echad mishishim ba'olam. Kush, 1/60th, not 1/6. Kush is 1/60th of the entire world. Ba'olam. Va'olam echad mishishim b'gan Eden. And the world is 1/60th of the size of Gan Eden. Listen to this. Let me read that again. Va'olam echad mishishim began. The world is 1/60th of the Gan. The Gan echad mishishim be'eden. And the Gan is 1/60th of Eden. The Eden echad mishishim begehenom. And Eden is 1/60th of Gehinom, which Rabbi tells you something absolutely amazing. That the largest area in the world is Gehinom. V'nimtza kala Olam kulo kikisui kedera leGehinom. It turns out that halacha l'maaseh, the entire world is viewed as a pot cover to Gehinom. Right, that's the size of Gehinom. To which the Gemara says to Yufta. Ultimately, again, this refutes the position of Rabbi. Because obviously, I will say, Rabbi is saying that the sun only traverses an area from east to west of 6,000 parsos. Obviously, describing the world in this size indicates that it must be a distance of much more than 6,000 parsos. I will say, what's the meaning of this? That it sounds like such a gloomy way to view the world, right? That the entire world is like a pot cover to Gehinom. We'll say what it's telling you is as follows. The Ben Yoyada brings this down as well. The yesod that, unfortunately, the reality of life is that every step we take is laced with the possibility of so many mistakes and missteps. And the reality is that for every step we take, there's 15 mistakes that you can make with every single step. And how we have to live life with such an acute awareness, because unfortunately, Gehinom is lurking all on. We'll say the worst Gehinom in this world is not the Gehinom that a person goes to after 120. That's not the worst Gehinom. The worst Gehinom is the Gehinom of our own creation, which we often make from our mistakes, missteps, and bad choices. Those of us who have lived in that Gehinom know it's terrible. It's terrible to live with the reality that my life could have been X, but instead I made bad decisions and therefore it's Y. That's what it means when it says the world is the top of the pot to Gehinom. That the Chazal just trying to sensitize us. Live life with awareness. Live life with understanding. Think before you act. Choose wisely in life. If you make the right choices, you will have Olam Haba in Olam Hazeh. But if Chas v'Shalom I make the wrong choices, I could chas v'shalom be experiencing Gehinom while still alive and kicking. The world is the pot top to Gehinom, teaching us that unfortunately we have to be so vigilant, because if we make mistakes, the Gehinom we create is so acute and so present. The Gemara goes weiter. Tashma, Tani de Be'elio. I'll say incredible messages in all of these Gemaras. Tani de Be'elio. Rabbi Nassan Omer, Kala Yishuv Kulo Tachas Kochav Echad. So I'll say this is interesting. Tachas Kochav Echad Yosef. So Tana Be'elio says, named Rabbi Nassan, the entire world sits under one star. In other words, one star is so large that literally, again, the entire earth is underneath one star. How does he know this? Teda, Shari Adam Nosin Ina Bakochav Echad, Baholech Lemizrach, Omid Kenegdo, La Arba Ruchos Olam Omid Kenegdo. Because I will say, interesting enough with the star, no matter where you go, you're underneath the star. So I'll say what they're perceiving is that you could walk anywhere and still see the same star. So that must mean that the star itself is obviously much larger than the earth. Therefore, we'll say it shows that the entire earth sits underneath one star. So once again, Tiyufta, this once again refutes Rava's position that the distance that the sun travels from east to west must be larger than 6,000 parsos. Tashma, Egla b'tzafon, v'akrav b'darav. So we'll say now, speaking a little bit about the zodiac signs. Egla is Taurus. Taurus is in the north. Akrav is Scorpio, is in the south. V'akrav b'darav. V'chol ha'yishuv kulo, v'chol ha'yishuv kulo, eno yoshev ela bein egla li akrav. And entire existence, the world, the earth, sits between Taurus and Scorpio. V'chol ha'yishuv kulo, eno hava ela sha'achas biyom. So we'll say ultimately again, and furthermore, the entire inhabited area of the world, and the sun really only has its impact on the earth, or really dips in, I guess, into the area of the earth 1 hour out of the day. How do we know this? So the Gemara says, Teida shebechamish chama b'mizrach, because we'll say again, at the 5th hour, the sun is in the east. Ubeshava chama b'ma'arav, and again in the 7th hour, the sun is already in the west. Chatzi sheish v'chatzi sheva. Ultimately, again, the middle of the 6th hour, the middle of the 7th hour, chama omedes berosh kol adam. Sun is directly overhead to yufta. Once again, this refutes Rava's position. Rabbi says, so all of this is just trying to prove that Rava's idea that the entire distance of the sun traveling from east to west is 6,000 parasols can't be correct. It has to be a larger distance. Tashma, do Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, ma tshuva hishivaso bas kol ha'osara. Rabbi says, it's actually a beautiful Gemara. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, what did the Baskol say back to the Rasha? Rabbi says, the Rasha, Rashi points out, is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu respond back to Nebuchadnezzar? B'shasha Amar, ala abama se'av av adameh le'elyon. So when Nebuchadnezzar says, Allah Bama Se'av, literally again, I will ascend to the heavens on the thickness of the firmament. Adama le'elyon, I will resemble God. This is Nebuchadnezzar essentially asserting himself as a powerful deity. Yatzasa Baskol va'amrasla. Baskol came out and said to Nebuchadnezzar, Rasha ben Benosha Nimrod Harasha. You Rasha, the son of Rasha, the grandson of Nimrod Harasha. Rashi points out over here, it doesn't literally mean that Nebuchadnezzar was the grandson of Nimrod, because remember again, Nimrod lives during the times of Avram Avinu. So obviously not literally his grandfather, but it means he's descendant from Nimrod. Shehimir eskala Olam kulo alai b'malchuso. That Nimrod literally again led the entire humanity to rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kama shnos of shaladam, right? Ultimately, again, how long does man live? It's a very overwhelming Gemara. Shivim shana. But I'll say the lifespan that we are given in this world is 70 years. Ve'im bigvuros shmonim shana. And again, if we're lucky and we have vitality and strength, 80 years. I'll say this is such a profound Gemara, because you think about this today in the days in which we live. Habaruch Hashem, really because of science and because of medicine, with, of course, incredible siyata d'shmaya, lifespans have been increased so dramatically. Rahman al-Islam, a person passes away at 70 years old, that's young. That's looked at as young in this world. The person passes even 80, right? There's an expectation, Baruch Hashem, but how careful we have to be to treasure life. Because David HaMelech says 70. If you're lucky, if you get 70 years, you're lucky if you get 70 years. And if you really have vitality, 80 years. 80 years. Watch this. Mina aretz ad l'rakia. This is incredible Gemara. Listen to how vast the world is. If a person were to try to walk from the earth to the rakia, now understand the word rakia is also a little bit elusive, because as we're going to see, Rashi already points out in Bereshis that there are shiva rakiyos, there are 7, so we call it 7 heavens, right? But it's 7 layers of rakia. So listen to this. The Gemara is incredible. So mina aretz, mina aretz ad l'rakia mahalich chamish meo shana. If a person were to walk, if you were to be able to walk from the earth to the rakia, that would be a distance of 500 years. 500 years. Va'ovyav sharakia mahalech chamish meo shana. And if you were to then traverse the thickness of the rakia, that would take me another 500 years. Ubein kol rakia l'rakia, and the distance between each rakia, there are 7 rakios, between each rakia, mahalech chamesh meos shana. So the distance, so remember, distance to the rakia, 500 years. Thickness of the rakia, take 500 years to traverse it. Distance between each rakia, another 500 years. V'chein bein kol rakia v'rakia. So I say, and remember, where does HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, reside? Above the rakios. Above the rakios. So if you were walking from this world, so to speak, to the celestial, about to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it is a distance of thousands of years. El Sha'al Turad El Yarkis Seibar. Be it HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Nebuchadnezzar, but I'll tell you a very quick journey. The very quick journey is to Gehinom. That's a quick one, right? That you can get there pretty quickly, right? Ultimately, again, so we'll say, so what do you see over here? Tiyufta, once again, I will say, what it's saying over here is Rava's idea that the span of the sun is 6,000 parasols from east to west. The universe itself is too vast. It's too vast. So therefore, Rava's calculation must be off. I just want to point out once again the incredible metaphorical significance of this statement. And I will say, it takes a really long time to make your way to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? If you try to walk it, it's thousands upon thousands of years of journey. You know, in the quest for Ruchnius, the quest of Ruchnius takes a long time. I will say a lot of times, you know, we want instant gratification in our spirituality as well. I want to learn and I want to feel inspired. I want to open my heart and I want to feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want Kedusha and I want it now. And what Chazal are teaching us is that the journey to the rakia takes a long time. But one thing is incredible, which is that if you keep walking, in Miras Hashem, you'll get there. If you keep on the journey and you keep consistent and you keep moving, ultimately you will get there. But it takes time to find Kiddushin. I will say today, in general, we all want inspiration, but we want inspiration that often comes with a connotation of I want to be inspired. Implicit in that statement is I want like someone to flip a switch. I want someone to flip a switch. That's not how inspiration works. It's not how Ruchnius works. It's a journey, and the journey takes a very long time. It's like when you're on any long journey. There are days where you feel nothing but exhaustion. There are days when you feel just flatline. There are days when I'm just wondering, why am I doing this? But if you keep up with the journey, you will reach the destination. The amazing part is, but how long does it take to get to Gehinom? How long does it take to get to Gehinom? Pretty immediate. Well, so we all know this from our life experiences. You know, one bad decision, one wrong turn, and unfortunately, I land myself not in the afterlife Gehinom, but in my life Gehinom. This is the incredible dialectic of life. It takes such a long journey to get to Kedusha, yet the Tumah of Gehinom, unfortunately, I could find in a moment with one bad turn, one wrong turn, one bad life decision. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tan Rabbanon. Chachmei Yisrael Omrim, right? The scholars, the Chachmei Yisrael say, Omrim Galgal Kavua. Literally, I will say, so this is actually interesting. Also, interesting astronomical machlokes. Galgal Kavua means the wheel of the zodiac. The wheel of the zodiac is fixed. Umazalos Chosrin, and it is the constellations themselves which rotate around the wheel. The Chachmei Umos Ha'olim Omrim Galgal Chosrin. The Chachmei Umos, the Gentile scholars say, Galgal Choser, the wheel of the zodiac moves, umazalos kavuin, and the constellations are fixed. Rabbi tshuva l'divrayim. So Rabbi says there's a tshuva, right? In other words, ultimately, I can refute that position by saying, Olam lo matzinu agala egla b'daram v'akra b'tzafon. It seems to be pretty clear that the constellations themselves are fixed. V'haraya, Taurus is always in the south and Scorpio is always in the north, which indicates that they're fixed in place. Well, maybe they do move, right? Maybe ultimately again they do move, but they move like the blades ultimately of a mill or like the pivot of a door. In the day, now that we spoke about the machlokes, the Chachmei Yisrael said, how does the sun move? It's very interesting. By day, again, I will say this is what they understood from their astronomical observations. By day, the sun moves beneath the rakia, and at night it moves above the rakia. The Chachmei Umos Olam Omrim Bayom Cham Alechas Lamata Min Rakia. The Chachmei Umos Olam said that ultimately, again, by day, they agreed that the sun goes ahead and moves beneath the rakia, ubalayla lamata min akarka. Very interesting. The Chachmei Umas Olam felt that the sun moves beneath the earth at night. Amar Rabbi said, "V'nirin divrei midvarinu." In this case, it appears that the Chachmei Umas Olam are correct and we're incorrect. Remember again, there's nothing wrong with saying. Remember again, this is not halacha, right? This is not psukim. This is observation. So comes along Rabbi and says, I think the Chachmei Umas Olam are right and we're wrong. Namely, that by day the sun moves beneath the rakia, and by night the sun moves beneath the earth. Now, when they say the sun moves beneath the earth, what they're saying is that the strength of the sun is felt in a subterranean way. Where do we see this from? So the Gemara says, because interestingly enough, by day the underground springs are cold, which would seem to indicate that the sun is really exerting its influence beneath the rakia but above the earth. Ubalayla roschen. It's very interesting, but somehow I guess by night the subterranean springs seem to be warm, which indicates that the sun is exerting its influence, quote unquote, under the earth by night. Tanya, Rabbi Nassan Omer Bimosa Chama Mahalachas Begova Sharakia. So Rabbi Nassan says, Bimosa Chama in the winter, so the sun goes ahead and operates at the height of the rakia. Leficha Kala Olam Kulur Oseach Hamayana Sonin. That's why again by summer the earth is warm, but the subterranean springs are cold. Interesting enough, in the rainy season, the sun operates at a lower level of the rakia. Therefore, again, the world is cold, but the subterranean springs are warm. Good. The sun operates in 4 different pathways over the course of the year. Nisan, Iyar, V'Sivan, Ma'aleches Baharim. During Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan, the sun exerts its greatest influence on the mountains. Literally means it walks amongst the mountains. It travels amongst the mountains. Kedei lefasher es hashlag, in order to melt the snow. Tammuz Av ve'Elul, Tammuz Av and Elul, Mahaleches b'Yishuv. The sun exerts its primary influence in inhabited areas. Kedei levashel es haperos, in order to cause the fruit to ripen. Tishrei, Marcheshvan, v'Kislev. Tishrei, Marcheshvan, and Kislev. Mahaleches b'Yomim. It goes ahead and operates by the seas. Kedei liyavesh es hanaros, in order to go ahead and literally dry out the rivers, which means to prevent the rivers from overflowing. Remember again, fine. Teves, Shvat, v'Adar. By Teves, Shvat, and Adar. Mahaleches b'Midbar. The sun operates by the desert area. Kedei shelo leyavesh es hazroim. So the sun exudes its greatest influence in the desert, so that the heat of the sun does not dry out the seeds which are trying to grow. We'll say incredible. Says the Gemara. Back to Pesach Sheni. Back to Derech Rechoka. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer. So Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: Misikufas. We'll say okay. There's so much more to say on these Gemaras, but we'll go a little bit later. So let's remember again. We had a very important machlokes in the Mishnah. The important machlokes in the Mishnah was as follows: what's the Derech Rechoka? So remember again, the Tanakama said Derech Rechoka is measured as an area of 15 mil. From Modi'in to from outside of Modi'in, right? Mina Modi'in lachutz. There was a position ultimately again of Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer said, Misikufas hazara. Even if you are standing at the threshold of the Beis HaMikdash, but outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So I will say, remember again, in this case, I'm in Yerushalayim. Not only Yerushalayim, but I'm standing in Harabayis. But I remain outside of the Azara the entire time. Halacha l'maisa, that is called Derech Rechoka. Let's at least begin this today. So the Gemara says, Va'afal gav dematzi ayo, even though technically speaking, I had the ability to enter into the Beis HaMikdash, v'lo amrina like kum ayo. So I will say, this is interesting. If you see a guy standing outside of the Beis HaMikdash, so Pashtus, what should we say to him? Go in, what are you doing? So apparently, according to Rabbi Eliezer, even though he's standing at the entranceway of the Beis HaMikdash, we do not tell him to go. In other words, if he's outside, he's outside. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, Va'atanya, Orel Shalom Mal, Anush Kares, Rabbi Eliezer. So yet, interestingly enough, an Orel, right, a person who's uncircumcised, if he does not do a bris milah erev Pesach, and he could have done a bris milah erev Pesach, he's chayiv kares. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer, Amra Abaye, Derech Rechoka Latar, So we'll say, so once again, the Gemara says, you can't compare derech rechoka to anything else. Derech rechoka, Rabbosai, is its own halacha. Arelos is its own halacha. Tuma is its own halacha. Derech rechoka is a unique circumstance. And Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that halacha lamaisa, if you are outside of the Beis HaMikdash, the entire zman shchita, even if you're literally standing outside, that is called derech rechoka. We'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up with this sugya miras Hashem tomorrow. We'll finish this machlokes. We'll do the halacha lamaisa, and then we're going to get into a great sugya concerning the distinctions between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Shkach Rabosai. Mm-hmm.